Hi everyone, this is coming to you live from Emmitsburg. We just finished our market outlook meeting today, and Matt has been gracious enough from StoneX, Matt Campbell, to stick around and answer a few questions while we record this video this afternoon. So Matt, you talked about kind of the start of the growing season being herky-jerky with the wet weather and then almost ideal conditions and leading up to this week's WASD production numbers. Can you kind of talk through that and what you were saying around production and this year so far?
Yeah, this has been, no year's the same. This year certainly had some weird things going on. The first thing would be the herky-jerky planting pace. Through the I-states, Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, our three biggest corn-producing states, all had kind of a race to get the first 40% planted, then about a 3-week hiatus, then the next 40% went in. So it definitely didn't go in, that second 40% probably went in less than ideal conditions and probably raised a question mark, early on in the growing season. It just didn't materialize into a market rally. And then on the back end of that, you really went right into one of the more favorable or least stress growing seasons we've had in recent memory. And I think the big thing about that is that this wasn't forecast to be a problem-free summer, and it turned out to be that way. It was supposed to be a hot summer, and we just never got any of that heat, specifically during July. So here we are, mid-August. You've not seen any real stress since the planting issues. We might still find that those planting issues were a little bigger than we think they are, but the recent WASD report did show record corn yield, about 6 bushel better than last year, which was also a record at the time. Frankly, you look across the landscape of how they came up with the yield data. The big producing states all were clear records per USDA, but there's a lot of problems in that southeast. And you kind of think about, what's the potential? I mean, how do you get much bigger than a 225 bushel per acre corn yield in Illinois? I just think it's going to be hard for them to raise this materially going forward. And so maybe we're closing in on the largest supply side that we might see this year.
The market in general has been on edge about not just the U.S. economy going into recession, but the global economy going into recession. Is the Fed's going to cut interest rate? Can you talk a little bit about where the demand side of the equation is right now?
Yeah, it's from a global consumption perspective, it just feels like we're collectively entering into I don't want to say recession, but definitely you've got a lot of different economies in the world trying to start reducing interest rates to stimulate growth. You can just tell that we're just not in a great situation. Housing seems to be a big problem across the world. There's some, unemployment data is also problematic here and other places. So long story short, the consumption side is changing. It's changed in China specifically from where it was for 25-year period. That's not to say that they're not still a player. It's just a different growth trend going forward than what we've seen. Looking at where we sit today, we don't have a ton of export business on the books to places like China, but that's probably going to change, short term, at least on the soybean side. Corn side, we've got a big crop coming at us, but we're going to have to be, a big player in the export front. And, even though maybe you're seeing consumption not change a great deal, there are some rest of world considerations on other corn producing areas that will drive more demand toward the U.S.
So you were just talking about some of those other challenges around the globe and supplies. Do you want to talk a little further about that?
We don't have a lot of competition. Really talking about 3 different main exporters that compete for the U.S. with the U.S. in the corn side of things, and 1 in the beans, and the 3 in the corn are Argentina, Ukraine, and Brazil. Argentina is probably on an upward trend right now from their economic situation, but Ukraine obviously clearly is still has a massive conflict situation going on with Russia that probably getting worse, if not a lot worse right now than better. Not only that, but they've been dealt, Mother Nature a very bad hand this year with real extreme heat. The corn crop size is getting reduced by the hour. So they're going to be dealing with, they're not going to be nearly as prevalent in the export. Brazil is another interesting one. And one of the main things there is that their harvested acres or planted acres, their acreage growth is starting to slow. And this is more of an economic or a margin-based situation where the farmers aren't probably making as much as they were during the previous cycle, call it 2020 to 2023. The profit margins were very small in that Safrinha area, if not deep losses. And so we saw acreage reduction in corn for the first time in about 10 years last year. And I don't know that we're going to see an increase off of that in the year ahead. So, I mean, you're already talking about Brazil, which for 2 years in a row was the largest exporter in the world, is not going to retake that title anytime soon, what it looks like. So, when you've got limited amount of competitors and two of them are seeing this kind of a trend, I mean, it does make the U.S. Importance that much more clear.
One of the other things you talked about today, Matt, there's a chart going around talking about the pattern of DEES 2024 futures mimicking a similar trajectory to DEES 2014. In that chart, it shows a low hitting late Sep, early Oct, and then a pretty healthy bounce of around $1 a bushel in corn heading into late Nov, early December. What kind of items are set up to give us that bounce do you see in the market?
That this year and that year have some parallels. I mean, that was a bumper corn crop that did go lower until we were kind of at that point where we said, okay, this supply is fully digested, and then we're going to start to talk about demand. And it was a big demand year. And this year is very likely to have that same approach. We're going to be, finalizing. I mean, I think the supply side's not that far away from being, I think this might be not a late September discussion, but maybe an early September discussion for this year. And then the demand base is going to come at us. I think we've got, like we talked about, there's not a lot of other competition in the market. We are price to sell. We are still the cheapest offer in the world market in corn. And then there's also some production risk. We're not, that's not a today story, but it's a story that you'll start to talk about in October, November regarding La Nina making its way back into the South American, cycle. That's been devastating in the previous 3 years we had that. You had a crop problem in each one of the 3 years, somewhere in northern Brazil, southern Brazil, and Argentina. If it materializes, that's one thing, but the risk is something the market's gonna have to deal with. So you're gonna have a potential southern hemisphere story. You've got big demand. I mean, these are two things that are upward momentum from prices. And I think that's going to be something that is going to be traded at some point in the not too distant future.
Matt, one of the other kind of counters to that we talked about today is beans. Beans have had much more the opposite, where we have overproduced, we have outpaced demand, and now we're in a kind of burdensome supply. What kind of things do we need to see changing over the next 3, 4, 5 months to get that spark going the other way on prices?
Probably two things, and again, it maybe didn't feel like it, but South America did harvest their record supply this record production this last cycle. The U.S. is about to harvest what we anticipate to be the largest supply. So in the last 6 months, you've dumped 2 record crops on the market. So it is a heavy looking world picture right now. We're also projecting that the next growing season for South America is going to produce an equally large, if not larger, supply. So the first thing would be, is there a La Nina story? Is the La Nina thing going to be a real thing? And is it going to be something that will take meaningful amounts of production out of the equation? I hate to be the person that says, oh, we need a weather problem to have prices go higher, because that's obviously always ever present. But that is kind of what you're painting yourself into that corner on beans, where you almost need something like that to be the case. The other thing that could be a story is China does have a lot of, very limited amount of coverage on for their crush needs. And, it's pretty much between the U.S. and Brazil. And I would assume that as we get deeper into the U.S. harvest, we're probably going to be the squeakiest wheel. So that could be something that starts to be a talking point too. So not too different from the corn story. Supply, a La Nina supply threat, or a potential Chinese demand story could be the things that would do it. It just needs to be way more severe for that to be a major impact on the bean market.
As always, thank you for your time and listening to this video. If you have any questions, please reach out to your favorite co-op employee or originator to ask, and we will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you for your time. Have a good day.